In the late 1970s, punk exploded like a short, sharp shock. Loud, fast, and unapologetically raw. But as its initial blast began to fade, the energy that it unleashed didn't disappear. Instead, punk would crack open the door for a wave of sounds to carry its DIY spirit into fresh new directions. So stick around, because today we're going to discuss releasing 2 hit singles about a 15th century French martyr, flying around the world in a Cessna prop plane to promote a record, and having the top-selling 12-inch of 1981 become your band's biggest mistake. This is New Wave Starter Pack 1981 Part 3. New Wave grew out of the late 1970s, taking punk's restless energy and reshaping it into something sleeker, catchier, and more forward-thinking. Instead of the raw snarl and destruction of punk, New Wave leaned on synthesizers, sharp pop hooks, and a playful sense of style. It was less about tearing down the establishment and more about reinventing it with irony, dance rhythms, and futuristic sheen. On one side of the Atlantic, artists like Devo, the B-52s, and Blondie gave the movement a quirky art school spin, while in the UK, bands such as Ultravox, Simple Minds, and the Human League pushed synthesizers and visual presentation to the forefront. By the time MTV launched in 1981, New Wave's mix of glossy sounds and striking imagery was perfectly suited for the new video age, propelling it into the mainstream. It's often mentioned in the same breath as post-punk, but the two were not quite the same thing. Post-punk acts like Gang of Four and Susie and the Banshees took punk into darker, more experimental territory with angular guitars and an emphasis on mood and tension. New Wave, in contrast, was typically more melodic, playful, and built for the dance floor. You could say they were siblings. Post-punk thrived in the underground, while New Wave was already strutting toward the spotlight of pop stardom. And then there were bands that managed to walk the line between the two, drawing on post-punk's atmosphere while embracing New Wave's accessibility. Which brings us to our first record, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, Architecture and Morality. Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, or OMD, fused icy experimentation with an undeniable gift for melody. Their 1981 album, Architecture and Morality, is a perfect case study of how those traits could come together in a way that was both challenging and massively successful. By 1981, OMD were coming into their own as one of Britain's most adventurous new wave acts. Released in November of that year, Architecture and Morality was the band's 3rd studio album following Organization in 1980. With this album, OMD would enjoy 3 top 10 hits, 2 of which were about Joan of Arc. Where their early work had leaned on raw synth experimentation, this record showed OMD refining their sound into something both commercially successful and artistically ambitious. The core duo of Andy McCluskey and Paul Humphreys, joined by Martin Cooper and Malcolm Holmes on drums, keys, and sax, were eager to prove that synthesizers could create emotional, even spiritual music, not just mechanical pop. The album was recorded at the Manor Studio in Oxfordshire and produced by OMD with Richard Manwaring. The title reflected the band's fascination with modernist design and philosophy. McCluskey had been inspired by architecture and the writings of De Stijl artists. Musically, though, the album was about pushing the limits of what synths could convey. The band incorporated mellotrons, choirs, and choral samples into their electronic framework, experimenting with texture and atmosphere in a way that set them apart from their peers. They were also writing under pressure. Organization had given them the hit Enola Gay, and they needed to follow it with something equally strong. Rather than just play it safe, they doubled down on ambition. 3 singles stand out as the heart of the album. Souvenir, sung by Paul Humphreys, is one of OMD's most beloved tracks. Built around lush synth washes and a delicate melody, it reached number 3 on the UK singles chart and proved that electronic music could be tender and romantic. Second single, Joan of Arc, inspired by the French martyr, is stately and melodic. As it slowly builds up, McCluskey delivers one of his most heartfelt vocals. And then there's Joan of Arc, Maid of Orleans, which is even more striking with its cold, atonal intro and martial drum patterns. It sounded unlike anything else on the charts. We were going on top of the pops with Bonnie Langford and Elton John and Cliff Richard, and we were playing a song that was in waltz time and started with 45 seconds of distortion, no chorus, and had a mellotron playing what sounded like bagpipes. Remarkably, Maid of Orleans became OMD's biggest international hit at the time, topping the charts in several European countries. Elsewhere on the album, tracks like Sealand and the title track Architecture and Morality stretched into atmospheric soundscapes, showing just how far the band was willing to experiment. One of the fascinating aspects of Architecture and Morality is just this, the band's insistence of balancing the pop tunes with avant-garde impulses. McCluskey has admitted that songs like Maid of Orleans were risky. They knew radio might not embrace a synth-driven waltz, but they believed the emotional weight of the track would carry it. And they were right. Behind the scenes, there were also debates about the band's image. OMD were not flamboyant in the way of like an Adam Ant or Duran Duran. Their appeal came from their earnest belief in the power of electronic music to connect on a human level. The fact that they made such unusual singles into international hits remains one of the more surprising success stories of the early 1980s. Critically, Architecture and Morality was greeted as a breakthrough. Reviewers praised its boldness, its blend of accessibility and experimentation, and its ability to elevate new wave and synth pop into something far more artful. Commercially, the album was also a smash. It peaked at number 3 in the UK and went on to sell more than 4 million copies worldwide. Over the years, its reputation has only grown. Many fans and critics regard it as OMD's masterpiece, the defining album of the synth pop era. I remember finding it in my dad's record collection and nearly wearing the grooves off the disc, playing it front to back for weeks. It's still one of my favorite albums, and I consider every track to be essential. While the group would spend the rest of the 80s progressively making their sound more commercial, Architecture and Morality showcased them at a time when they could have both the pop hits and the artistic credibility. This is a German pressing, and it's die cut, inner sleeve, alternate cover of the Peter Saville artwork. I think this one is US. Inner sleeve. And this is a Canadian pressing signed by all 4 original members that played on Architecture and Morality. Souvenir 10-inch. Joan of Arc single. And the waltz, Maid of Orleans. Next record, Adam and the Ants, Prince Charming. By 1981, Adam and the Ants were one of the most recognizable names in British pop. Prince Charming was the group's 3rd studio album, released just months after the career-defining Kings of the Wild Frontier. That earlier record had pushed them from the post-punk underground into mainstream stardom, thanks to their distinctive 2-drummer Burundi beat, Marco Peroni's sharp guitar work, and Adam Ant's mix of pirate, dandy, and outlaw imagery. The speed of their rise was dizzying. Kings had gone to #1 in the UK, and by the time the band regrouped for Prince Charming, they were carrying the weight of huge expectations. The album was recorded at Air Studios in London with producer Chris Hughes, also known as Merrick, one of the band's 2 drummers. Adam was intent on pushing things further. If Kings had been a fresh start, then Prince Charming would be a spectacle. He and Peroni set about expanding the Ant sound, layering in orchestration, brass, and even more polished production sheen. The sessions reflected Adam's desire to move beyond the raw post-punk scene into something grander, with an emphasis on visuals as much as music. It was also a period of strain. The pace of success was intense, and this album would end up being the last recorded by the classic Ants lineup before Adam struck out as a solo act. The opener and lead single, Stand and Deliver, was a bold statement, an irresistible blend of pounding drums, Peroni's riffing guitar, and Adam in full highwayman persona. The single went to #1 in the UK, and its theatrical video, with Adam leaping through carriage windows and robbing the upper class, became one of the most iconic promo videos in the early MTV era. The title track, Prince Charming, was equally striking, a swaggering anthem whose message, ridicule is nothing to be scared of, was both camp and defiant. Its accompanying video, featuring screen legend Diana Dors, who was paid £1,000 to portray a fairy godmother, doubled down on Adam's knack for turning pop into pantomime. Don't you ever stop being dandy, showing me your handsome. Then there was the divisive third single, Ant Rap, where Adam experimented with a half-spoken delivery while name-checking himself and his band. Critics hated it, but fans sent it to #3 on the charts. The visual side of Prince Charming became just as important as the music. Adam leaned heavily into the idea of the pop star as a larger-than-life character, drawing from glam rock's theatricality and punk's edge, but fusing them with something brightly colored and accessible to a mass audience. The videos and costumes fed into the tabloids' fascination with him, and teenage fans decorated their walls with his posters. Yet, this constant attention also hinted at a burnout that was soon to come. On release in September '81, Prince Charming climbed to #2 on the UK album chart and spent over 6 months there. Commercially, it was a huge success, but the critical response was mixed. Many reviewers accused Adam of relying on gimmickry and costume, arguing that the substance of Kings of the Wild Frontier had given way to style for style's own sake. Others, though, recognized the album as a bold attempt to redefine what new wave could look and sound like in the pop mainstream. Over time, the record has been reassessed. What once seemed excessive is now viewed as part of its charm, a vivid snapshot of early '80s pop when imagination, theater, and sheer audacity could make you a star. For Adam and the Ants, Prince Charming was both a commercial peak and a turning point, marking the end of the band but cementing their place in the new wave canon. Original Canadian pressing. Insert. Next record, Gary Numan, Dance. By the summer of 1981, Gary Numan was already a star, but he was also restless. Dance was his 5th studio album overall, following the huge commercial success of Replicas, The Pleasure Principle, and Telecon. Those records had made him one of the most distinctive voices in British electronic music, and singles like Cars and Friends Electric were huge international hits. At the height of his fame, Numan had grown disenchanted with stardom, and following his massive Wembley Arena shows in April 1981, announced his retirement from touring. This decision baffled the press and his fans, but it explains the more inward-looking mood of Dance. Rather than repeating the icy, sci-fi synth-pop formula that had made him famous, Numan set out to create something different. He aimed for a stripped-down, experimental, almost ambient sound influenced by Japan, Eno, and Bowie's Berlin period. Numan later called Dance his first real album as producer, since it captured exactly the sound he wanted without label or outside interference. The album's sessions took place at Rock City Studios in Shepperton, England, with Numan producing alongside engineer Nick Smith. The Prophet 5 synthesizer was added to Numan's synth roster alongside his trademark Polymoog, as well as a Roland CR78 drum machine, giving the electronics a more varied character. Together with the inclusion of saxophone, live drums, Numan collaborated with Japan's Mick Karn, whose fluid fretless bass playing defined much of the album's grooves. Numan had been listening obsessively to Japan's Gentlemen Take Polaroids and wanted to tap into that mix of sophistication and alienation. For Numan, the recording process was deliberately stripped of rock theatrics. He wanted to move away from stadium-sized anthems and into something moodier and introverted. The album's lead single was the left turn She's Got Claws, with Karn's bass sliding around the loose rhythm and a sleek saxophone riff woven into the arrangement. It was unlike anything Gary had released before. The song charted well, reaching the UK top 10, but it confused listeners who were looking for another Cars. One of the few tracks on Dance with a more conventional vocal structure, Stories still leans heavily on atmosphere rather than hooks. The arrangement uses fretless bass and understated electronics with a languid pace that mirrors the lyric's sense of melancholy and alienation. Numan sings of failed communication and fractured relationships, making the track feel like a whispered confession inside an otherwise cold landscape. Originally released as a single in 1981, Stormtrooper and Drag was a collaboration with former bassist Paul Gardner that was later folded into Dance reissues. While not traditionally part of the core album, I've always considered this song an underappreciated 1981 single and one of Gary's lost masterpieces. When Dance came out in September '81, it reached number 3 on the UK albums chart, showing that Numan still had a strong fan base. Critics, though, were split. Some admired his move into more experimental territory, while others felt he had lost the sharp impact of his earlier work. Many more pointed out the clear influence of Bowie and Japan, with some suggesting Numan was following rather than leading. Also, at this time, Numan shocked the press and fans by announcing that he wouldn't tour this record. Instead, he took a break from live performance to attempt a round-the-world flight in his own single-engine Cessna 210 Centurion. The journey took 2 tries. On his first attempt, mechanical issues forced him to land in India, where he was briefly arrested as a suspected spy. While this reinforced his image as an eccentric pop star pilot, critics argued the adventure pulled him away from the momentum of his career, just as Dance was confusing audiences with its more experimental, less commercial sound. Quote, "Where Telecon had been angry and full of paranoia, Dance was sad and haunting. In many ways, it was an open door into the way I was feeling at the time." Over the years, Dance has been reevaluated. Today, the album is recognized as a bold departure, a transitional work that expanded Numan's musical vocabulary and showed he was more than just a one-trick synth-pop act. What was once seen as a misstep is now regarded as one of his most intriguing and underrated albums, foreshadowing the darker, more experimental directions he would later pursue in his career. US pressing, and it's a gatefold, inner sleeve, She's Got Claws, 12-inch. Next record, Japan, Tin Drum. Released in November 1981, Tin Drum marked Japan's most unique, challenging and striking album, emerging from both their growing success in the country that inspired their name and their increasing friendship and affiliation with bands like Yellow Magic Orchestra. It was also the final full studio effort from the group, and what a way to bow out. There was practically no resemblance to the trash glam numbers of their early days. Their previous record, Gentlemen Take Polaroids, had hinted at a new direction, more sophisticated, more atmospheric, but Tim Drum took that vision into sharper focus. Following the departure of guitarist Rob Dean, frontman David Sylvian, bassist Mick Karn, keyboardist Richard Barbieri, and drummer Steve Jansen underwent an art pop reinvention. Recording took place at the Manor Studios in Oxfordshire, the same place OMD recorded their big record, and Odyssey Studios in London, with producer Steve Nye. Nye played a huge role in shaping the album's sound. Tight, meticulous, and forward-thinking. The sessions reflected the band's growing interest in non-Western musical traditions, especially Chinese and Southeast Asian influences. The album's mix of fretless bass, angular percussion, and synth textures set it apart from the rest of British new wave at the time. During the sessions, David Sylvian increasingly steered the band towards his vision of austere art pop, with Mick Karn's fretless bass remaining at the core of their sound. The creative tension between them added to the album's intensity, while Sylvian's immersion in art, literature, and world music shaped both the sound and imagery of Tin Drum. The album's cover, showing Sylvian with chopsticks in a sparse room beneath a weathered poster of Mao, reflected this fascination with East Asian aesthetics, though it also drew some criticism for cultural appropriation. Opener The Art of Parties is a collision of tribal percussion, restless bass lines, and Sylvian's commanding vocal, a mission statement for the album's experimental approach. The standout single was Ghosts, a sparse, haunting ballad that defied every rule of the pop charts. Built on little more than electronic pulses, Sylvian's pained vocal, and Karn's subtle bass, it became Japan's biggest hit, reaching number 5 on the UK singles chart. Its stark minimalism was groundbreaking in 1981, a song that dared to leave space and silence where others would fill every gap.
When I've broken every door, the ghosts of my life.
My favorite is Canton, an instrumental centerpiece that blends driving rhythms, metallic, percussive synths with Eastern influences to create a hypnotic, cinematic soundscape. Mick Karn's elastic, funky bass drives the track, while its delicate layers and exotic textures make it endlessly captivating. Upon its release, Tin Drum was widely acclaimed, with NUma and Melody Maker hailing it as Japan's masterpiece and a standout in the new romantic and new wave scenes. Not designed for stadiums or dance floors, it captured a distinct artistic mood that resonated with critics and a growing cult audience. Over time, its reputation has only grown. Today, it's seen not just as Japan's finest work, but one of the defining art pop albums of the early 80s, influencing artists from prog to post-punk, including Roland Orzabal and Robert Smith. Austere and challenging, Tin Drum rewards repeat listens. It captures Japan at their creative peak, just before internal tensions led to their breakup. Original Canadian pressing. Final record for today, Soft Cell, Non-Stop Erotic Cabaret. When Soft Cell released Non-Stop Erotic Cabaret in November of '81, they went from obscurity to overnight fame. The debut came from Leeds art students Mark Almond and David Ball, who shared a love of electronic music and performance art. Unlike the polished New Romantics, Soft Cell embraced the darker, grittier synth pop they called industrial cabaret, with songs about nightlife, obsession, and the seedier side of city life. The album was recorded at Advision Studios in London with producer Mike Thorne, who had recently worked with Wire and Soft Machine. Thorne's production was crucial. He gave the record its slick, club-ready punch, while still leaving space for Allman's theatrical, often anguished vocal delivery. Young and still finding their footing, Allman drew heavily on his experiences in the London club scene, especially the Soho underworld of sex shops and late-night bars, and these stories fed directly into the lyrics. Ball, meanwhile, was building dense electronic backdrops with his synthesizers and drum machines, proving that two men and a handful of machines could make music every bit as powerful as a full band. Tracks like CD Films and Sex Dwarf leaned fully into provocation, bringing voyeurism and taboo subjects into pop in a way few acts had dared. The latter blended industrial-influenced synths with sexually charged confrontational lyrics. Its raw cabaret meets club energy is still a favorite with fetish and goth crowds the world over. The most famous track, of course, is Tainted Love. Originally a little-known 1964 Northern Soul single by Gloria Jones, Soft Cell slowed it down, stripped it bare, and rebuilt it into one of the all-time most definitive synth-pop songs. Released as a single in mid-'81, it became a worldwide smash. #1 in the UK, #8 in the US, and at one point, holding the record for the longest run on the American Hot 100. On the 12-inch, the track was extended into a medley that unexpectedly segued into the Supremes' Where Did Our Love Go? This wasn't just a remix whim, it actually caused a lot of confusion with listeners and DJs at the time, some thinking it was a mastering error. Remarking on the 12-inch, Mark Allman would say, "If only we put our own song on it, then we would have been considerably richer." Commenting on how the licensing and royalties for the medley turned out to be so expensive, David Ball would say, "It's probably been the most costly idea of our career. No one thought Tainted Love would become the monster it's become."
Take my tears and that's not nearly all tainted love.
Wave Hello, Save Goodbye closes the album with surprising tenderness. A torch song ballad disguised as synth pop, it demonstrates Allman's ability to channel real heartbreak through his melodramatic style.
Don't belong to you, you see.
Critically, Nonstop Erotic Cabaret divided opinion in 1981. Some dismissed it as tawdry or sensationalist, focusing too much on its seedy imagery, but others recognized it as a bold reinvention of pop, where synthesizers became the soundtrack to urban alienation. It also set the template for the pop duo, the reserved keyboardist in the background paired with a flamboyant frontman. Soft Cell paved the way for acts like Yazoo, Eurythmics, Pet Shop Boys, and Erasure. Commercially, it was a success, and over the years, its reputation has soared. Today, it's seen as a landmark early new wave and synth-pop record, influential not only for its sound, but for its daring subject matter. Nonstop Erotic Cabaret showed that electronic pop could be glamorous, sleazy, heartbreaking, and thought-provoking, and all at the same time. Original Canadian pressing. Say Hello, Wave Goodbye, backed with Where Did Our Love Go and Tainted Love dub. Memorabilia, backed with Persuasion. It's a Mugs Game, backed with Sex Dwarf. So, that's gonna do it for today. I'm gonna link below some excerpts from the excellent Synth Britannia doc with OMD, Japan performing at Hammersmith Odeon in 1982, along with some other goodies. If you enjoyed this video, kindly give it a thumbs up and a hype. And consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any of my upcoming new wave or artist-specific episodes. Are you familiar with all the records I covered? What are your favorite new wave albums of 1981? Let me know below, as well as if you'd like to see a part 4 to this list, and I'll be sure to cover this classic. Thanks for watching. You can see more of my videos right here. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you guys in the next one.